our show today with David Lesch, our legal correspondent. We're several weeks into our latest law series on municipal liability. And we've already covered subway liability and the dangers of riding city buses. Today, we spend our discussion on the serious and controversial issue of police brutality. Here, as always, to break down this topic is attorney and legal correspondent David Lesch. Dave, good to have you.
Nice to be here, Darren. When we're talking about police brutality, it leads to other areas of the law which we'll end up discussing as well. Police brutality leads to what might be a false arrest, which then leads to what's called malicious prosecution because you're prosecuted for a crime, which leads to, if you end up spending time in jail, false imprisonment. So what ends up happening is police brutality ends up just migrating into so many different areas. So let's start off with the typical person who comes into, an attorney comes into my office and basically says, look, the police beat me up. But what always ends up happening is, well, were you also arrested? Yes. What was the crime you were arrested for? I usually ask. You find out what they were arrested for. Do you have a court date? When are you going back? The preliminary investigation is the person who ends up coming in and tells you that they've been hurt, but it ends up leading into so many other different areas that you're going to have to really do your research, because it's not just, a police officer doesn't usually just find somebody on the street who's staring at the stars and end up beating you up. There's circumstances that surround a police brutality. Of course they're going to say either you were resisting arrest, you were someplace you shouldn't be, you may have been dealing drugs or doing something else. It doesn't justify a brutal beating by a police officer, but you can guarantee that the police are going to say that you did something that forced them to use what is considered to be excessive force.
Now, normally it's considered that the plaintiff would have to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but now the truth of the matter is, when you're in this kind of situation, when you have police brutality, in a case of police brutality, it almost seems like you have to get a whole lot of evidence in order to get yourself out.
When you're arrested and a case is brought against you, the prosecutor has to prove your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what we're talking about. But when you have to bring an action in civil court, you do not have to meet that threshold against the police or against the city of New York for an action. You do not have to show that beyond a reasonable doubt they should not have used that excessive force. Okay. You have to show clear and convincing evidence is generally the standard that might have to be shown, which is not as tough to do. But you still need to prove that the force that was used against you was excessive given the circumstances. If you're in the process of running away from a crime, and they have to tackle you, and you get hurt in that way, well, that might not be excessive force. If it turns out that you were going to hurt another one of the police officers or hurt the police officer in question, and they needed to restrain you in such a way and you get hurt, that might not be excessive force. If if there are threats against the public, threats that they have to take you down in such a way, not excessive. But let's say they're handcuffing you, and you've already been restrained, and they pick you up in such a way that they pull your arms behind your back up higher and higher, that they tear a muscle in your shoulder or they break your wrist. Well, that's excessive force. Or they kick you or they punch you while you're already restrained. Well, there's no need for that. That's excessive force. So what you're going to need to show is that you have to show there are witnesses there who saw this. There are bruises in your body that are not consistent with the type of crime that they arrested you for. But you can guarantee that no matter what, to cover themselves, the police usually will hit you with a resisting arrest. The resisting arrest, he was struggling to get away, so I had to restrain him with my knee in his back or her back. Do you understand? Right. So these are the type of things that you have to, that you end up having to go up against. And so you take pictures of it. By the time somebody comes and sees me, they've already been arrested, they've already gone through the precinct, they've been brought to the courthouse, they've usually already been arraigned, they've already seen the judge, and they've already been in court date. All this has already happened within 24 to 48 hours before they even come to me. So what I usually say is, first of all, do you have a record? I like to know a little bit about you.
Right.
Okay? What were the circumstances around this particular arrest? Why were you there at this particular time at night? What were you doing? All right, so because usually the client immediately just says, they beat me up for no reason. That always ends up happening. Well, tell me a little bit more. I got to get to the background here. Let me find out a little bit more. What are you being charged with? All right? Mere shoplifting or attempted murder? You understand? What's going on here? Now, were you caught with a weapon? That makes a big difference. And then what I'll usually say is, you need a criminal lawyer. You probably have legal aid, but you may want a private lawyer, which we can arrange for you, or you can, if you have the money to pay for a criminal attorney. But you must not plead to the crime. If you plead guilty to the crime, then it's going to be very difficult to represent you on a police brutality type of case.
Right.
Do you understand? Doesn't mean you may not still have one, but jurors are not as sympathetic to somebody who pleads guilty to the underlying crime. So it's much tougher to do. And that means you can't plead to what's called an ACD, an acquittal in contemplation of dismissal. Can't plead to that either. So what I'll generally do for the person who comes in, I'll say, let me do a notice of claim for you to protect you that we're going to make a claim against the City of New York and the police department. We have to file this within 90 days of the brutality. If it's false arrest, 90 days from the arrest. Malicious prosecution, from the time that you're being prosecuted. False imprisonment, from the time you get out of prison. That's when these 90 days run.
Give me an idea as to what kind of numbers are we seeing, because, you know, years ago we were seeing an increasing number of charges against police officers, police brutality cases. Are the numbers still on the rise, or just going underreported?
Sometimes it goes with the economy. The economy is bad, and people are, a little bit more desperate. Sometimes they end up involved in places they shouldn't be, and the police are cracking down in those areas. It looks like from where I'm sitting, it doesn't look like police brutality is on the rise in terms of cases that I see. It seems to be fairly level. But I have a couple of cases where the police have done some things to some of my clients which are, you really go beyond excessive force. I always make sure that I tell the client, file a complaint on your own with the Civil Complaint Review Board. Make sure that they investigate. But as I was talking to you before I sat down earlier, that doesn't go very far many times. The Civil Complaint Review Board dismisses most of the claims. So you really, your best recourse is an action in civil Supreme Court in the Bronx. If it happens to you in the Bronx, it's where it happens. And I tell the clients, I said, look, it's a long road. Just make sure that that you're patient. You get your medical treatment. Sometimes there's a psychological injury, especially when a police officer does this to you. You might be under the care of a psychiatrist or a psychologist. You have to stay under the care for a while. I'll get a report. Once it's in suit, once you start the lawsuit, now remember the notice of claim is only 90 days. You only have 90 days to file a notice of claim. But even once you file it, you only have a year and 90 days from the time of the occurrence to start the lawsuit.
So time is really of the essence. So when a person says that they've been involved in something, sometimes we do know people have a tendency to wait.
Yes.
So the best thing to do is take advantage of the immediacy of the matter.
Right.
And get
I
yourself.
will say that sometimes people will wait. They'll say, well, you'll have a grand jury's hearing, or I don't want anything that I say during the hearing for the lawsuit to be used against me in criminal court, so I'm not going to file anything. Don't do that. I know there will be testimony in Civil Supreme that you think that a DA may be able to use against you in the criminal court, but we can put over those types of hearings until your criminal court proceeding is completed. So don't do that. So sometimes people think that way. I don't want to get involved in a civil lawsuit right now because I want to get the whole criminal thing wrapped up. Yeah, but you only have 90 days to file a notice of claim for the civil action. So don't do that. Let me file, or let somebody file the notice of claim for you to protect you. So, and then you still have a year and 90 days, but that goes fast too. So these are called statute of limitations. I mean, you only have a certain amount of time to do these things. So that's very, very important. But the most important thing that you have to remember is that you don't just have a claim for police brutality. There's a false arrest claim because I guarantee they're going to arrest you for something. There's a malicious prosecution because the DA is going to prosecute you for something. And there's a false imprisonment claim because many times, based on what you've committed, and if you don't have bail, you're going to be sitting in jail. So there are 4 different claims, not just police brutality. So understand that. And each claim has a separate cause of action with a separate notice of claim sometimes. So these are all things that you have to know. So if you feel that the police did something to you, get to an attorney quickly so a notice of claim can be filed and you can have your rights protected.
All right, David Lesch, thanks a lot. And of course, we'll be able to catch you on Bronx Legal. What's coming up on Bronx Legal?
We got a couple things coming up. The producer has some things in the works. I think we're going to hit some immigration issues, some landlord-tenant in the next couple of months, and then get back into the Rockefeller drug laws, which we always like to get into. Some of the drug laws and where that's going, and repealing drug laws, that type of thing. So.
All righty, David Lesch. You can catch him on Bronx Legal right here on Bronx Television. Thanks a lot, Dave.